Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really getting into something intense. It's a deep look at a very public, very messy celebrity feud.
Yeah, messy is putting it mildly. We're talking J.K. Rowling and Emma Watson and how their fallout fits into bigger, what some call, culture war.
Right. And the source material we're working from today, well, it's something else. It's extremely opinionated, very explicit, definitely polemical. It analyzes this whole conflict and the wider woke war, as the author terms it.
Exactly. And just to be crystal clear for you listening, our job here isn't to agree with. Honestly, its viewpoint is pretty extreme. We're here to neutrally dissect it.
Yeah, we want to pull out the arguments, the specific claims, the, let's say, intense rhetoric used.
Right.
Basically give you a shortcut to understanding just how deep this division runs, at least from this particular very aggressive viewpoint.
We're mapping out one specific, very loud corner of this conflict, and the source sees this Rowling-Watson clash as a huge turning point.
A real moment where the power dynamics supposedly shift. It really focuses on the backlash Emma Watson got after some comments.
And then Rowling's response, which the source frames as utterly devastating. For this author, that exchange was proof positive that the tide was turning.
A sign that, pushing back against the prevailing narrative was actually becoming viable, maybe even advantageous.
Pretty much. So we're going to unpack exactly why the source sees that single celebrity clash as such a major victory in their woke war.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea. The source claims the battlefield is changing. That old saying, go woke, go broke. They say that doesn't quite cut it in.
Right. The author actually kicks off by saying they were wrong before. They thought woke was dead, maybe based on a few elections or something. But they revised that. The new line is much punchy. Woke wasn't dead. Woke was silent. Woke was suppressed. Meaning the progressive cultural movement didn't vanish. It just went quiet in some areas because, according to this source, it already won. It got intuitions, so it didn't need to shout. It wasn't defeated.
Okay, so if it wasn't defeated, just suppressed. What's the new plan?
Well, now the source says they're on a war to kill woke. Seriously, that's the language. And they point to economic stuff as proof they're gaining ground.
Like what specifically?
The big example they hammer is Netflix. They claim there was this massive campaign to cancel Netflix.
Right, I remember hearing about that.
And the source alleges this was led, or at least heavily pushed, by Elon Musk. And the reason Netflix was supposedly pushing trans crap on children. Again, very explicit language.
Okay, and they connect this campaign directly to financial consequences for Netflix.
Oh, absolutely. They state pretty baldly that Netflix lost $15.1 billion in market.
Wow. And how long?
In just 2 days. 2 days. Now, obviously, market value swings for lots of...
Sure, could be anything. Economy, competition.
Exactly. But the source attributes that entire $15.1 billion loss directly to the cultural backlash over... That's the key. They present it as solid proof that the progressive side is now losing financially on the cultural battle.
That's a powerful narrative link they're drawing, connecting cultural disapproval directly to massive financial pain. But they say the real win is more than just companies losing money, right?
Oh, yeah, much more. The source says the real victory isn't just hurting bottom lines, it's when the culture fundamentally shifts.
How do they define that shift?
It's when media outlets, cultural institutions start openly saying things the source agrees with, like their example, starting to say trans women are men.
Okay.
But crucially, the biggest win is when ordinary people can say those things, at work, online, wherever, without getting canceled, fired, or publicly shamed.
So establishing a new normal where those views are acceptable again.
Precisely. That's the ultimate goal they lay out, a total reversal of the previous.
This is where it gets really extreme, though. We need to stress, again, this is the source's position, not ours.
Yeah.
They're not just criticizing woke culture, they're calling for its destruction.
Total destruction. Yeah, the rhetoric ramps up massively here. Forget middle ground, forget live and let live. That's explicitly rejected.
Well, why? What's the justification?
They frame the opposition, the woke movement, as, and this is direct language again, satanic barbaric shit.
Yeah.
And they claim this movement wants children harmed, specifically raped and castrated, and that it promotes, quote, murder of children in the womb.
That's incredibly strong dehumanizing language, focusing on harm to children.
It is, and it's used to eliminate any gray area. If you're on the fence, if you preach live and let live,
you're complicit.
Worse than complicit, according to the source. They say you're sitting idly by while they are stealing, castrating, and murdering your...
Wow. So neutrality isn't an option in there.
Not at all. It's framed as an act of sin because the stakes are supposedly that high, the physical safety of kids. So the only acceptable goal is to uproot this evil. No compromise, just war.
Okay, let's pivot from that wide ideological war zone to the very specific personal flashpoint, Rowling versus Watson. The source really zeroes in on an incident at the BAFTAs as the public started this.
Yeah, the BAFTAs clip, Emma Watson is presenting an award, and she says something like, "I'm here for all the women."
But one.
Right, but one. And the source immediately interprets that single phrase in the most damning way possible. No ambiguity.
How did they?
Their take. The one woman she wasn't for was obviously J.K. Rowling. Rowling, who the source paints as a real woman fighting for biological reality.
And Watson, therefore.
Watson, by excluding Rowling, was implicitly siding against that and by extension, siding with what the source describes as women who are born with penises and want to rape other women in bathrooms.
That's quite a leap from but one. They connected directly to the most extreme interpretation of the opposing view.
Instantly. It turns a possibly vague comment into a direct, aggressive political statement against Rowling in their narrative.
Okay, but the big public response from Rowling didn't happen right then. It came later, after Watson talked about it on the Jay Shetty podcast.
That's the trigger, yeah. Watson tried to smooth things over in that interview. The source absolutely blasts this as fake empathy bullshit.
What did Watson actually say?
She said she still treasures Rowling, but the thing that upset her most was that a conversation was never made possible about their difference. She positioned herself as wanting dialogue, but being denied it.
And the source's reaction to that claim?
Pure ass. They basically call her a snake, and their proof. A devastatingly simple point.
Which was?
"You have her Festel number, you snake." That's the quote. The argument is, how can you publicly lament that a conversation wasn't possible when you literally had the private means, her phone number, to initiate one?
So the source sees that proof. It was all performance. Prioritizing public image over a genuine private attempt to talk?
Exactly. It painted her desire for conversation as completely insincere, just brand managed.
And that sets the stage for Rowling's massive Twitter thread. The source describes it in glowing terms, right? Like the mother of all dressing downs.
Oh, yeah. A verbal evisceration. Yeah. They see it as a masterful, multi-point takedown of Watson's entire position and persona in this whole.
What were the key points Rowling made, according to the source's analysis?
First, Rowling sort of clears the air about obligation. She says something like, "I'm not owed eternal agreement from any actor who once played a character I created."
Setting it up not as demanding loyalty, but something else.
Right. It frames what follows not as sour grapes, but as a principled response to Watson's public stance, given their...
Okay, but then came the really sharp part, the privilege argument, which is usually a weapon used by the progressive side.
Exactly. Rowling completely flipped the script. She basically says Watson has so little experience of real life because she's always been cushioned by wealth and fame, calls her ignorant of how ignorant she is, and then she contrasts it with her own path, saying she lived in poverty while writing the book that made Emma famous.
So reclaiming the authority of lived experience.
Totally. The source sees this as brilliant. Rowling essentially says, "My hard life gives me more standing to talk about real-world issues than your privileged activist." It delegitimizes Watson using the left's own favored tool, the privilege critique.
And Rowling used really specific examples to drive that point home, didn't she? To show how Watson's life shields her from the consequences of the policies she supports.
Yes, very concrete, very visceral examples. The source highlights these heavily. From Rowling points out things Watson will never experience status.
Like what?
Like needing a homeless shelter, or being stuck on a mixed-sex public hospital.
Things that directly relate to the debates around sex and gender policies?
Exactly. And specifically on the gender issue, Rowling notes Watson probably uses single-occupancy bathrooms, likely with security nearby. She asks if Watson's ever had to strip off in a newly mixed sex-changing room, or if she's likely to need a state-run rape crisis center that might not guarantee female-only staff.
Those examples make the abstract debate feel very real, very physical for less privilege.
That's the power, according to the source. It shifts the focus from woke theory to potentially dangerous or uncomfortable realities for ordinary women, realities Watson is completely...
And then the kicker, the really personal detail, the handwritten note.
Yeah. This is framed as the ultimate proof of Watson's alleged insincerity, the final betrayal.
What was the story there?
Rowling revealed that when the threats against her, death threats, rape threats were at their absolute, forcing her to significantly upgrade her security. Watson sent a handwritten note.
Saying what?
Something like, "I'm so sorry for what you're going through."
Okay. Seems supportive on the surface.
But the source, echoing Rowling's implication, points out the devastating contact. Watson had her phone number. She could have called private, offered real personal. Instead, she chose a handwritten note, a gesture that's symbolic, distant, and crucially, easily publicizable later.
So the interpretation is that even her expression of sympathy was performed, chosen for optics over genuine connection.
That's precisely how the source frames it. Proof she prioritized.
And Rowling apparently mentioned she'd been asked about Watson before, but always declined to comment.
Yeah, for years, she'd apparently shut down journalist questions about Watson's stance. But this sequence, Watson's public silence on the threats, then the podcast comments about wanting a conversation, combined with the private knowledge of the note not call tipping.
Where Rowling decided, okay, gloves off, time to exercise her right to respond publicly.
Exactly. The source portrays it as this moment of calculated patience finally erupt. Their final verdict on the exchange, she murdered. It was seen as a complete rhetorical takedown, using personal betrayal and privilege to neutralize a major voice on the other side.
So this idea of Watson being neutralized leads us straight into the source's broader critique of her whole career and her activism. They basically argue it's all a product of privilege-seeking relevance, not real conviction.
They start right at the beginning. Born in Paris, wealthy lawyer parents, private schools, tutors, multiple homes, the whole 9 yards.
Painting a picture of extreme insulation from struggle.
Definitely. And they use this to make a pretty cynical point about her policy.
Which is?
That someone that privileged, who never needed, should logically be on the other side, the right, focused on individual responsibility, traditional values.
So setting up her later activism as inherently fake because it doesn't stem from personal need or experience.
That's the core argument. It's presented as a choice made for other reasons, not necessity.
Okay. Then looking at her career after Harry Potter finished, the source seems pretty dismissive of her attempts to break free from Hermione.
Very dismissive. They mentioned she apparently considered quitting the franchise after Goblet of Fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But then, according to the source, a multi-million-dollar paycheck convinced her to stay.
Okay.
And then her later films, the indie ones like My Week with Marilyn, Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Bling Ring, the source explicitly notes these weren't big hits. They didn't establish her as a major star outside of Potter.
So the argument is the acting career didn't quite take off independently.
Which, in the source's narrative, forced her to find relevance elsewhere. And that leads directly to their main target, her activist persona. They call it the current thing activist.
Okay, we need to unpack that term, current thing. What does the source mean by that?
It's central to their critique. Current thing is their label for whatever social or political issue is currently trending as the important cause in progress.
Like it changes over time?
Exactly. The source sees it as fluid. Maybe it's BLM 1 month, climate change the next, then Ukraine, then Palestine. The specific issue doesn't matter as much as the performance of caring about whatever is.
And Watson is presented as a prime example of this.
Oh, absolutely. They use some really cutting terms. Slacktivist, atheist activist, a cultural chameleon.
Meaning she just adapts to whatever's popular.
That's the claim. They say her public stance is just echoing the current thing. They even call it the Mark Ruffalo technique, implying it's just celebrities repeating slogans, no nuance, no original thought. Worse, they describe her as a series of safe, politically correct talking points wrapped up in a flesh suit. Basically, a puppet for a prevailing trend.
Do they give any specific examples of this influencing her actual work?
Yeah, they bring up the live-action Beauty and the Beast. Apparently, Watson pushed to have Belle rewritten as an inventor and engineer.
To make her more of a modern feminist icon?
That's how the source twisting the character to fit a specific girl boss narrative, regardless of the original story. They suggest her job is just reading words written by smarter people, and her opinions aren't really hers. She's just a propaganda.
That's incredibly harsh. Reducing her entire public persona to opportunistic signal. What do they claim is the underlying motivation?
Purely a need for relevance and attention after the acting roles didn't sustain her stardom. Source puts it crude. The choice was basically activism or porn to stay famous.
Wow, okay. And the consequence of this path.
According to the source, it's led her to become increasingly disconnected from reality. And now she's facing the music for that opportunism specifically being publicly demolished by Rowling. They see it as karma, a self-inflicted wound for choosing trend or substance.
Let's pull back again to the source's overall tone. It's not just critique. It's framed as actual war, even suggesting physical danger for their side.
Yeah, they really emphasize the security aspect. They point out that people like Rowling who speak out against certain trans ideologies have had to seriously beef up their personal security.
Due to threats.
Due to documented death threats, rape threats, harassment. They also mention Steven Crowder wearing body armor on college campuses.
And the point of highlighting.
To argue that their side is the one actually facing physical danger and intimidation, it's an attempt to flip the script on who the truly violent or threatening group is in these culture clashes.
Right. So they take the common narrative that conservatives or reactionaries are the dangerous and turn it on its head.
Completely. They mock the other side for calling themselves the party of empathy. The source calls them the death threat party, the assassination party.
Strong word. Do they offer specific incidents beyond the general threats to Rowling?
They mention one specific, though perhaps less widely known, incident involving an activist named Z. Cohen Sanchez, apparently following conservative figure Charlie Kirk. The source claims Sanchez was implying conservatives were dangerous.
But the source argues.
The source argues the reality is the opposite, that it's the left who assassinate people and genuinely want their opponents dead. They use this specific confrontation to generalize that the progressive side is the one employing threat and intimidation.
Okay, so using a localized conflict to paint the entire opposition as violently hypocritical.
That's the rhetorical strategy, yes. Asserting that the need for body armor and security details proves who the real aggressors are, despite the other side's claims of empathy.
Now, about their own call to action. It's aggressive, but they add a specific qualifier, don't they? They want destruction, but
non-violently. That qualifier is crucial. The goal is explicitly stated: murder the idea, destroy the culture. We need to kill it first, non-violently.
So a cultural war, not a physical one, is the stated aim.
Yes, but the language remains incredibly confrontational. They warn people who take the side of lies that karma will come for you and so will I. It's still framed as a deeply personal battle.
And they use a particularly loaded comparison for people who just go along with the current thing in institutions or companies.
Extremely loaded. They compare them to the modern iteration of the Nazi soldiers that are, quote unquote, just doing their job.
Wow. Equating passive conformity on cultural issues today with collaborators during the Third Reich.
That's the comparison they make. The implication is enormous. Simply going along with the prevailing progressive consensus because it's easy or professional is morally bankrupt, akin to historically condemned indifference. It demands active resistance.
It basically eliminates any possibility of neutral ground or passive disagreement.
Yeah.
So what happens then, in their view, if someone does switch sides? If someone who is woke defects now that the source believes the tide is turning?
Their stance is pretty unforgiving. They say forgiveness might be off.
Might be?
Yeah, forgiveness is on the table, but trust, never. Trust is gone forever.
And does forgiveness mean they get a pass professionally?
Absolutely not. The source is emphatic. Even if forgiven, these defectors should still lose their jobs and be demonized in society.
So even changing your mind isn't enough to escape punishment. It's a very zero-tolerance approach.
It really is. It suggests they believe any defection now is purely strategic, driven by changing winds, not genuine conviction. So those people still have to pay for their past complicity.
Okay, so this core idea from the source that a lot of progressive activism is basically a dishonest grift for power or relevance, they apply this lens to other big cultural movements too, right? Not just the trans debate.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They take aim at the Me Too movement, particular venom.
What's their main beef with Me Too?
They absolutely savage it. Call it dog shit, one of the most destructive movements ever.
Strong feelings there. What's the basis for that?
The core argument is that it was built on lies and deceit. Why? Because in their view, it created an easy way to destroy people based on unsubstantiated allegations.
So a critique focused on due process and the potential for false accusations.
Exactly. They argue it created this massive imbalance where accusers could make claims, potentially false, with no punishment, while the accused faced instant career and reputational ruin, often without proper investigation or evidence.
So less about the goal of stopping assault, more about the method creating injustice.
That's the frame. They see it as a flawed weapon, easily misused to tear down established figures and bypass accountability.
And then they circle back to Emma Watson specifically, using her UN Goodwill Ambassador role to hammer the privilege point again.
Right. This is used as Exhibit A for the poverty privilege. The source basically mocks the idea that Watson described again as a multimillionaire, privately educated theater kid, Hollywood actress, could possibly understand or represent women facing actual life or death person.
They contrast her role
with the horrific reality faced by women in some parts of the world, using the example of Yazidi women being enslaved and brutalized by ICE. Truly harrowing stuff.
And the criticism is that Watson's high-profile activism, even at the UN level, didn't engage with those kinds of brutal realities.
That's the charge. The source claims these kinds of dire global issues weren't really brought up in the UN during her time, or at least weren't her focus. The implication: celebrity activists in the UN focus on safe, Western issues that boost their own image, rather than tackling the really hard, dangerous problems that don't offer easy PR wins.
Okay, and this whole theme of the grift, of movements being fundamentally dishonest, they extend this using the Israel-Palestine conflict as a kind of contemporary case study. We need to be careful here just to report their argument.
Yes, absolutely. The source uses the conflict to argue that the entire woke movement is built on grifts and lies. How? They point to a specific scenario.
Which is?
They talk about a hypothetical comprehensive peace deal referencing a past Trump-Netanyahu plan as an example, which would have required Hamas to leave power and all hostages to be returned, theoretically ending the war.
Okay, a potential path to peace in their telling. And what was the alleged response from the pro-Palestine side?
The source claims the entire pro-Palestine movement around the world rejected such deals, saying it's not enough.
And the source interprets this rejection
as proof that the movement isn't really about peace or helping Palestinians. If they reject a deal that stops the fighting and frees hostages, the source argues, then their true motive must be something else.
Which they defined as the grift.
Exactly. They conclude it's a scam, that the free Palestine people, as they put it, don't want the war to end because the ongoing conflict is the grift. It keeps the movement relevant, keeps donations flowing, maintains political pressure.
And they back this up, dream quotes.
Yeah, they include quotes attributed to supporters like, I don't want peace with Israel, I want Israel gone. They use this to argue the real goal isn't coexistence or a two-state solution, but the destruction of Israel and the conflict serves that end.
So across these different issues, trans rights, Me Too Palestine, the source applies the same template. Surface-level claims of justice hiding cynical opportunism and a desire to perpetuate conflict, not solve.
That's the unifying theory they present. It all comes back to supporting the current thing for social gain. They even suggest many people who were loudly pro-trans just didn't give a S about trans personally. They did it because it was the thing to do. Purely performative, driven by social pressure or personal #tag out.
Well, this has certainly been a intense deep dive. We've unpacked a really polemical source, laying out its view of the culture war as actual war, the high personal stakes in the Rowling-Watson feud, and that deeply cynical take on celebrity activism as pure opportunism.
Yeah, we've seen how this particular viewpoint demands not just winning arguments, but the total, albeit nonviolent, murder of the idea they oppose. And the Rowling-Watson clash was the perfect case study for them to define what they see as cowardice versus conviction. Watson became the symbol of the cultural.
So wrapping it all up, what's the final takeaway regarding Emma Watson, or maybe any celebrity who aligns with the current thing? The source offers some pretty direct advice, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. It's incredibly provocative. After calling her a fraud and a propagandist puppet, the author tells her to basically take her millions, they concede she earned the money, and see the Rowling takedown as a wake-up call.
And the advice is?
It's stark. Stop being a political mouth. Find God. Get married. Build a family.
Wow. That's a complete 180 from the public persona she's cultivated. A total rejection of public activism in favor of traditional private life.
It's the source's prescription for saving her, essentially. They literally say, fuck Hollywood, build a quiet life, get off the political stage, because in their eyes, she violated a fundamental principle. The source boils it down to, if you stand for nothing, well, you'll fall for anything. That's the core failure they pin. Prioritizing trends over held beliefs, or maybe having no choice at all.
So the final message isn't just about her politics, it's about conviction itself, or the perceived lack of it.
Exactly. It's a warning, really. This source argues that if you build your career on cultural conformity, when the culture shifts, you'll be exposed, and the backlash brews. For this author, the ultimate win would be seeing figures like Watson abandon the public square and embrace the very traditional values they once.
A really stark final thought about the potential costs aligning with the prevailing winds, especially when those winds inevitably change direction. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.